Between 1862 and 1865, 14 children mysteriously vanished from Sacred Heart Orphanage in Pennsylvania. They weren't adopted or transferred, they simply disappeared from records, leaving no trace. Local Protestant families suddenly appeared with Irish Catholic children working on their farms, children who spoke with thick accents and bore the scars of institutional life. When questioned, their stories never added up. Recently uncovered letters between the Mother Superior and Philadelphia's bishop reveal the horrifying truth: these children weren't missing. They were sold. Before we dive into the chilling details of Sacred Heart, this channel is for those brave enough to uncover the darkest chapters of American history. If you're ready to explore the secrets powerful institutions want buried, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and comment your state below. Are you brave enough to uncover what happened to those 14 innocent souls? Let's find out together. Help me with a like and a subscribe to motivate me to make better videos, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. The truth begins not with their disappearance, but with the desperate circumstances that brought them to Pennsylvania's rolling hills. In 1862, Lancaster County was a land of prosperity and prejudice. The fertile farms fed Union soldiers, making Protestant, German, and English farmers wealthy, but they faced a labor shortage, with many young men off fighting in the Civil War. Sacred Heart Orphanage, established in 1859, was part of the solution. Situated outside Strasbourg, this Gothic building, a Catholic fortress amidst Protestant communities, housed nearly 60 children by 1862. These were Irish Catholic children from Philadelphia's overcrowded tenements, or orphans of immigrants who had died working on the Pennsylvania Railroad. The children aged 5 to 16 wore gray wool uniforms and worked in the orphanage's gardens, helping with daily chores. Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, a sharp, determined woman, had grown Sacred Heart into a vital institution. But by 1862, it was struggling financially. The local Protestant community viewed the orphanage with suspicion, and the Civil War only heightened tensions. Anti-Catholic sentiment was strong, and business dealings with Sacred Heart were fraught. Amid these difficulties, Father Michael Brennan arrived as chaplain in 1862. Unlike previous priests, Brennan was young, ambitious, and saw opportunities where others saw only problems. With an eye for business, he began making plans that would change the lives of the orphaned children. In May 1862, he arranged for several older children to be placed with local families to help with the harvest. This wasn't unusual, but Sister Agnes noticed Father Brennan was handling the arrangements himself, bypassing the usual procedures. By June, Timothy Walsh, a 14-year-old boy, was sent to work for Ezra Hoffman, a prosperous wheat farmer. Timothy had been told he would be treated fairly and paid wages to support Sacred Heart. When Timothy met Hoffman, the farmer examined him like livestock, checking his strength and experience before offering $45 in gold coins for the boy's work. Father Brennan blessed Timothy, assuring him that he was doing a great service for his faith and country. What Timothy didn't know was that his journey was just the beginning of a much darker story. Timothy's work would help feed Union soldiers, but Sister Agnes grew uneasy as she watched him leave with Mr. Hoffman, a prosperous wheat farmer. The quickness of the arrangement and the gold payment, rather than paper currency, raised suspicions, but with Father Brennan's confidence and Mother Ali's approval, Sister Agnes let it go. Just 3 days later, 16-year-old Margaret Connolly disappeared under similar circumstances, taken by Mrs. Sarah Zimmerman to work as a servant. Mrs. Zimmerman paid $60, explaining she urgently needed help. As the summer of 1862 wore on, this pattern repeated. Every few weeks, Father Brennan would arrive with another prospective employer, always Protestant, always wealthy, always needing immediate help. Payments grew larger as the harvest season neared. By September 1862, 8 children had been placed with families, and Sacred Heart's financial situation improved dramatically. They could pay off debts, buy winter clothing, and even expand the orphanage. Mother Ali praised Father Brennan's success, but Sister Agnes remained unsettled. None of the placed children had written home a stark contrast to past placements. When she tried to visit Timothy at the Hoffman farm, she was turned away. The breaking point came when Sister Agnes saw Mrs. Hoffman at the market and asked about Timothy. Mrs. Hoffman claimed she had never employed any orphans, insisting her workers were all local men. When pressed, she became defensive and confused. That evening, Sister Agnes confronted Father Brennan. She demanded to know the truth and asked to see the written agreements for the children's placements. At first, Father Brennan dismissed her concerns, but when she threatened to contact the bishop, his tone shifted. "These are complicated times," he said coldly. "The war has created opportunities we must seize for the greater good. The children are safe, and their sacrifice ensures Sacred Heart can continue to serve God's purposes." "What sacrifice?" Sister Agnes demanded. "What have you done with those children?" Father Brennan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I've found them homes where they can contribute to the war effort while learning valuable skills from Protestant families who appreciate their labor. In return, these families have made generous donations that have secured Sacred Heart's future. It's an arrangement that benefits everyone involved." But Mrs. Hoffman said Sister Agnes started what she needed to say to protect her family's privacy. Father Brennan interrupted. "The families who have taken our children value their discretion. Some arrangements are best kept confidential, especially during wartime." Sister Agnes felt a cold chill. "Father, are you telling me that you have sold those children?" The words hung in the air like a curse. Father Brennan's eyes narrowed and his voice grew cold. "I'm telling you, sister, that you have a choice. You can continue to serve God faithfully at Sacred Heart, focusing on your duties and trusting your superiors, or you can pursue questions that will bring nothing but trouble to this institution and everyone in it. The bishop sent me here to solve Sacred Heart's problems, and I've done just that. I suggest you remember where your loyalties lie." The winter of 1862-1863 passed in uneasy silence at Sacred Heart. Sister Agnes continued her duties as treasurer, but the joy had left her work. She studied the ledgers with a new perspective, noticing patterns she had missed before. The donations that had seemed so generous all came from one vague source: placement services, which corresponded to the dates the children had been taken from the orphanage. Slowly, Sister Agnes realized the truth. What she had witnessed wasn't charitable placement, but something far more sinister. The children hadn't been adopted. They had been sold to Protestant families who needed workers but didn't want to pay adult wages. This was not a series of charitable arrangements. It was human trafficking disguised as religious charity. The realization haunted Sister Agnes, torn between her vows of obedience and her duty to protect the innocent children in her care. The 8 children who had disappeared were her responsibility, and she had failed them. Mother Ali seemed unaware of the true nature of Father Brennan's actions. She praised his success in securing good homes for the children, dismissing Sister Agnes's concerns with explanations about Protestant families discouraging communication with Catholic institutions. "Those children are beginning new lives," Mother Ali said. "We must trust that God has guided them where they need to be." But Father Brennan was already planning to expand his operation. As spring approached, he began evaluating the physical condition, work skills, and temperament of the orphanage's children. He focused particularly on newcomers, those who had few connections in the orphanage and whose disappearance wouldn't cause disruption. He was building a network of Protestant families across Lancaster and surrounding counties. The success of his initial placements had created demand for more children, and the upcoming planting season promised even higher prices. Father Brennan spoke of expanding his operation to include children from other Catholic orphanages, creating what he called a regional placement service. Sister Agnes realized that she was witnessing the birth of a systematic human trafficking operation, exploiting both the desperation of Catholic institutions and the prejudices of Protestant employers. The orphanages needed money, and the Protestant families needed cheap labor. Father Brennan had found a way to profit from both, all while maintaining a veneer of religious respectability. The psychological toll on the remaining children was subtle but undeniable. They noticed the older children who had left never returned or wrote letters. Whispers spread and anxiety grew. Reaching their teenage years no longer felt like a milestone, but a sign that they might be next. Mary Catherine Donovan, just 10 years old, and close to Margaret Connolly, began having nightmares. She would wake in the night crying for Margaret and begging the sisters not to let the Protestant men take her away. When Sister Agnes tried to comfort her Mary, Catherine clung to her, whispering, "They're not coming back, are they, Margaret and Timothy and the others? They're never coming back." ChatGPT said the question haunted Sister Agnes because she began to suspect that Mary Catherine was right. The children who had been taken were not being trained for better futures or independence. They were being consumed by a system that valued their labor more than their humanity. Once they entered that system, they ceased to exist as individuals with no rights or futures of their own. As the snow melted and spring approached, Sister Agnes decided to act. She secretly started documenting every child who had been placed, noting names, ages, physical descriptions, and the families who had supposedly taken them. She discreetly questioned recent arrivals from Philadelphia about any missing siblings or friends at other Catholic institutions, and what she uncovered confirmed her worst fears. Sacred Heart's missing children were part of a larger network of exploitation that spanned across Pennsylvania, possibly beyond. In March 1863, as the Civil War intensified, Father Brennan received an unexpected visitor, Bishop Francis Kendrick of Philadelphia. Officially, he was there for a routine inspection of the diocese's rural institutions. But Sister Agnes quickly realized his visit was far from routine. The bishop, a stern intellectual, who had risen through the church ranks by combining theology with sharp administrative skills, had been receiving troubling reports from across the state. Children were disappearing from orphanages without proper documentation, and suspicious financial windfalls coincided with these disappearances. The pattern had become undeniable, and the bishop had come to investigate personally. Father Brennan received the bishop with elaborate courtesy, showing him Sacred Heart's improved facilities and presenting financial records with pride, explaining how his placement program had transformed the orphanage. The bishop listened without comment, observing every detail of the orphanage's operations. However, when Bishop Kendrick asked to see the documentation for the children placed with local families, Father Brennan's confident facade began to crack. He explained that the records were stored in Lancaster and couldn't be retrieved immediately, but the bishop insisted on seeing them before he left. That evening, Father Brennan worked frantically in his office to create the required documentation, but Sister Agnes, feeling the weight of her conscience, made a courageous decision. She approached the bishop privately for a confidential meeting. Bishop Kendrick, recognizing signs of corruption, agreed to hear her out. In the orphanage's small library, Sister Agnes revealed everything she had uncovered: the secret records, the missing children, and her suspicions about the true nature of Father Brennan's placement program. She described her encounter with Mrs. Hoffman at the Lancaster market and the growing fears for the welfare of the children. The bishop listened in grim silence, and when she finished, he spoke with the weight of absolute authority. "What you have told me represents one of the gravest scandals in the history of our diocese. If your suspicions are correct, Father Brennan has not only violated his vows, but has committed crimes against both church and civil law. I want you to understand that pursuing this will likely result in the closure of Sacred Heart and significant damage to the church's reputation in Pennsylvania. Are you prepared for those consequences?" Sister Agnes met his gaze without flinching. "Your Excellency, I took vows to serve God and protect the innocent. Those 14 children trusted us and we failed them. If Sacred Heart must close to prevent this from happening to other children, then that is God's will." The bishop nodded slowly. "Very well. Tomorrow I will confront Father Brennan with your allegations. I want you to be present as a witness and bring all your documents. We will uncover the truth, no matter the cost." But Father Brennan, ever keen on self-preservation, had noticed the private meeting. He understood Sister Agnes's refusal to meet his eyes during evening prayers. That night, as the orphanage slept, he gathered the most important documents and as much money as he could carry, then disappeared into the Pennsylvania countryside. By morning, Father Brennan was gone, along with nearly $300 from Sacred Heart's treasury and all records of his operations. He left behind a brief note claiming he had been called to serve as a military chaplain and would be leaving immediately for the front lines. The note made no mention of the missing children or their families. Bishop Kendrick was furious but also relieved. Father Brennan's flight confirmed Sister Agnes's allegations and freed him to take immediate action. He dispatched investigators to locate the missing children and began to determine which other institutions might be involved. Over the next weeks, they uncovered a network of corruption involving at least 3 other priests and Protestant families throughout southeastern Pennsylvania. The operation had generated thousands of dollars in illegal profits, exploiting vulnerable children for unpaid labor and social isolation. But the investigation revealed something even more disturbing. Some of the children could not be located at all. Some families who had taken them had moved out of state, leaving no forwarding addresses. Others claimed the children had run away or died of illness, but offered no documentation to back their claims. The trail of at least 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, had gone completely cold. The discovery that several children were still missing transformed the bishop's investigation from a church matter into a criminal case, one that would eventually involve both state and federal authorities. The bishop realized some of the children might have been transported across state lines, which would make their disappearance a federal crime. In April 1863, Sister Agnes received an unexpected visitor, Jacob Stoltzfus, a Mennonite farmer from Lancaster County. He had heard rumors about the investigation and came forward with information that could help locate some of the missing children. Stoltzfus explained that his family had been approached by Father Brennan the previous summer about taking in a Catholic orphan to help with farm work. The Mennonites, neutral in the war, had been struggling with labor shortages as their young men left to avoid the draft. Stoltzfus's father had been tempted by Father Brennan's offer, but ultimately declined as it conflicted with Mennonite principles about fair treatment of workers. Jacob Stoltzfus knew of other Mennonite families who had accepted children from Father Brennan, and he grew increasingly concerned about their treatment. The Mennonite community was close-knit and largely self-governing, but rumors had begun to spread about families exploiting orphaned children, like slaves, isolating them from the outside world. "There's a family in our district," Stoltzfus told Sister Agnes and Bishop Kendrick. "The Yodas. They took 2 children from your priest last summer, an Irish boy and girl with red hair. The boy's about 14, the girl maybe 12. They work from dawn to dusk in the Yoda fields and live in a shed behind the barn. My wife has seen them at the creek, and she says they look like they're afraid of their own shadows." Bishop Kendrick immediately dispatched investigators to locate the Yoda farm and verify Stoltzfus's claims. What they found confirmed the worst fears about the fate of the missing children. The Yoda family had indeed purchased Shaw McMahon, a 14-year-old boy, and his younger sister Ellen from Father Brennan. Despite being only 11, the children were living in conditions that barely qualified as human. They slept on straw in an unheated shed, worked 16-hour days without pay, and were forbidden from speaking to anyone outside the Yoda family. They had been told that Sacred Heart had burned down in a fire and that all the sisters had died, leaving them with no one to turn to for help. The Yodas threatened to hand them over to Union Army recruiters if they tried to run, claiming that Irish Catholic children were considered enemy sympathizers and would be imprisoned or shot. The discovery of Shaw and Ellen was the first concrete evidence that the children were being held in conditions of slavery. but it also raised terrifying questions about the other missing children. If the Yodas were willing to treat children so brutally, what might have happened to those sold to families with fewer scruples? The investigation took on new urgency when Bishop Kendrick received a letter from the Catholic Diocese of Baltimore reporting similar disappearances from orphanages in Maryland. The letter described a network of priests and religious officials selling children to Protestant families across the Mid-Atlantic region, some being taken as far south as Virginia and North Carolina. The operation seemed much larger than anyone had suspected, and Father Brennan was just one participant in a regional conspiracy. As federal marshals joined the investigation, they uncovered a sophisticated criminal network that had been operating for at least 2 years. The conspirators had a system for identifying vulnerable children, creating false documentation and moving them across state lines to families willing to pay premium prices for workers they could control completely. The network had generated tens of thousands of dollars in profits, while condemning hundreds of children to forced labor. The most disturbing discovery came when investigators located a farm in Chester County, where 3 former Sacred Heart children had been found dead under suspicious circumstances. The farmer Samuel Crawford claimed the children had died from a fever during the harsh winter of 1862 to 1863, but the coroner's examination revealed severe malnutrition and physical abuse. The children had been buried in unmarked graves behind the barn with no reports made to civil or religious authorities. Crawford, a prosperous grain merchant, initially denied any knowledge of how the children had died, but when confronted with the coroner's evidence and threatened with murder charges, he broke down and confessed. He admitted that he had purchased the 3 children from Father Brennan for $200, intending to use them as unpaid farm workers. However, the children, weakened from their institutional upbringing, had struggled to adapt to the harsh farm labor. Crawford claimed he tried to care for them as they became ill, but didn't seek medical help, fearing questions about their presence on his farm. By the time he realized how serious their condition had become, it was too late. Rather than report their deaths, he buried them secretly and destroyed all evidence of their existence. The discovery of these 3 dead children sent shockwaves through the investigation and transformed public perception of the case. What was initially seen as a minor scandal had become a story of systematic child abuse and murder. Newspapers throughout Pennsylvania began calling for the immediate arrest of everyone involved, and political pressure mounted for a federal investigation. Just when it seemed that the full extent of this horror had been revealed, the investigation took an even darker turn. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happened when federal authorities finally tracked down Father Brennan and uncovered the true scope of his network. Federal marshals located Father Michael Brennan in October 1863. Father Brennan was finally found at a Union Army camp near Gettysburg, where he had been serving as a chaplain under an assumed name. He had grown a beard and was using the alias Father Patrick Murphy, claiming to be from the Diocese of Boston. However, his distinctive Pennsylvania accent and knowledge of Latin liturgy eventually exposed him. When confronted with the evidence of his crimes, Brennan initially maintained his innocence, claiming he was providing a valuable service to both the Catholic Church and Protestant families in need of workers. However, the evidence was overwhelming. Federal investigators had documented at least 47 children sold through his network across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, tracing financial records showing that Brennan and his collaborators had generated over $15,000 in profits, an amount larger than most Americans earned in a decade. Under intense interrogation, Brennan finally confessed to the full scope of his operation. He revealed that he had created the network by recognizing that Protestant families were willing to pay substantial sums for children they could control. He had convinced other priests to participate by arguing that the profits would help struggling institutions survive the pressures of wartime. Brennan explained with chilling matter-of-factness that children were selected based on age, physical condition, and social isolation. Older children able to perform heavy labor commanded the highest prices, while younger children were sold to families needing domestic servants or help with lighter farm work. Brennan preferred children with no relatives or outside connections, as their disappearances would be less likely to be noticed or investigated. He callously stated that these children had no future anyway. They would likely die young from disease or accidents. At least in his mind, they were serving a useful purpose by helping Catholic institutions. Brennan's confession led to the rescue of 11 more former Sacred Heart orphans, but 6 children, including Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly, remained unaccounted for. Some had been sold to families who moved west, taking the children to territories beyond federal jurisdiction, while others had been claimed to have died or run away with no credible evidence. The investigation also uncovered evidence that some children had been sold to families with much darker intentions. 3 children were found to have been sold to a wealthy Philadelphia merchant who kept them as personal servants, forcing them to work without pay and preventing any outside contact. 2 others had been sold to a Virginia plantation owner where they were forced to work alongside enslaved African Americans, creating a grotesque parallel to slavery. Most disturbing was the discovery that at least 3 children had been sold to families specifically seeking them for personal service, a euphemism suggesting that some of the missing children had been sold into sexual slavery. Brennan had maintained detailed records of the children he sold, including their ages, descriptions, work skills, and temperaments, creating a catalog system for child trafficking. When confronted with the evidence, Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley, who had trusted Brennan and believed he was placing children in good homes, suffered a complete nervous collapse. She had unwittingly been an accomplice to the trafficking and was removed from her position, spending the rest of her life in a convent infirmary, unable to speak coherently about Sacred Heart. Sister Agnes, despite her efforts to expose the conspiracy, was consumed with guilt. She had suspected something was wrong, but had followed her vows of obedience to religious authority, preventing her from acting sooner. She left Sacred Heart after the investigation and spent the rest of her life working with freed slaves in the South, seeking redemption through her service to victims of human trafficking. The trial of Father Brennan and his collaborators became one of the most sensational criminal cases of the Civil War era. The federal prosecutor charged them under the newly passed laws against interstate trafficking in human beings, arguing that their actions were comparable to the slave trade. The defense tried to portray them as misguided religious figures trying to help children find better lives, but the evidence of systematic exploitation was undeniable. Testimony from rescued children revealed the horrific trauma they had endured. Shaw McMahon, found at the Yoda farm, testified that he was forced to work 18-hour days and was beaten when he showed signs of exhaustion. His sister Ellen described the harsh conditions in which they lived. Other children testified about being denied medical care, forbidden from speaking their language, and threatened with violence if they contacted their former caretakers. The most impactful testimony came from 12-year-old Bridget O'Sullivan, who had been sold to a family in Baltimore County. Bridget described being forced to work as a domestic servant from dawn until midnight, sleeping on the kitchen floor and eating scraps. When she tried to run away, she was locked in a root cellar for 3 days without food or water. The family had told neighbors that she was a distant relative, preventing anyone from questioning her treatment. Father Brennan showed no remorse during the trial. When given the opportunity to address the court, he justified his actions as necessary for the survival of Catholic institutions during wartime. He claimed the Protestant families who bought the children were providing them with opportunities they would not have had in orphanages. He regretted only that he could not help more children escape the institutional system. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Brennan was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, while his collaborators received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The judge condemned their crimes as a betrayal of everything civilized society holds sacred, and expressed particular outrage at their exploitation of religious authority to commit what he called the most heinous form of slavery. The scandal destroyed Sacred Heart Orphanage. The Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia closed the institution in 1864, transferring the remaining children to other orphanages. The building was sold to a Protestant denomination and converted into a seminary, but that venture failed within a few years. Local residents reported strange accidents befalling anyone who attempted to renovate or use the building, and it became known as a place cursed by the horrors that had transpired there. Humanity, and they vanished into the shadows of a society that turned a blind eye to their suffering. The question of what happened to the missing children continues to haunt me, and I fear we may never uncover the full extent of the horrors they endured. Their names may have been erased, their histories buried, but their stories are a haunting reminder of how easily the most vulnerable can be exploited when unchecked power is allowed to thrive. For decades after the scandal broke, various groups tried to operate a school or religious institution on the site of the Sacred Heart Orphanage, but none were successful. The building became a symbol of betrayal, its once hallowed halls now forever marked by the tragedy that occurred within its walls. Investigators continued to search for the 6 missing children, but their fates remained a mystery. Timothy Walsh, the red-haired boy who had disappeared first, was reportedly seen working on a farm in Ohio in 1867. However, when authorities arrived, the family had moved on, leaving no trace of where they had gone. Margaret Connolly, the bright girl who spoke multiple languages, was allegedly seen working as a servant in a wealthy household in Virginia, but she too vanished before rescuers could reach her. The other 4 children, Patrick Murphy, Bridget O'Brien, and 2 younger children whose names were intentionally obscured in Father Brennan's records, simply disappeared into the vast anonymity of post-Civil War America. They may have been moved from family to family, their identities altered, their histories erased. Some may have died from overwork, abuse, or neglect, their deaths unreported, their graves unmarked. Others may have survived into adulthood forever, carrying the trauma of their stolen childhoods. The psychological impact on the children who were rescued was profound and long-lasting. Many struggled with what would now be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, experiencing nightmares, anxiety attacks, and difficulty trusting authority figures. Several of the rescued children ran away from the new institutions where they were placed, preferring life on the streets rather than facing the possibility of being betrayed again by religious authorities. The scandal also had lasting effects on Catholic-Protestant relations in Pennsylvania and beyond. Protestant communities already suspicious of Catholic institutions now had concrete evidence to fuel their fears about papist corruption and foreign influence. Catholic leaders, for their part, faced an uphill battle in trying to rebuild trust with both their congregations and the broader public. The case became a rallying cry for anti-Catholic sentiment, which persisted well into the 20th century. In response to the scandal, federal authorities used the Sacred Heart case to justify expanded oversight of religious institutions and stricter enforcement of laws regarding the treatment of children in institutional care. New regulations required detailed documentation for any placement arrangements and mandated regular inspections of families who took in children from orphanages. These reforms helped prevent similar large-scale trafficking operations, but they came too late to help the 14 children who had already disappeared from Sacred Heart. The question of what happened to those missing children continued to haunt the investigators. Federal Marshal James Crawford, who had led the initial investigation, spent years following up on rumors and alleged sightings, but he never found conclusive evidence of any of the missing children's fates. In his final report filed in 1870, Crawford wrote, "The trail of these innocents has grown cold, and I fear that the truth of their ultimate fate may never be known." His words echoed the tragedy that had been ignored for so long, the children swallowed by a system that had valued their labor more than their lives. The story of Sacred Heart Orphanage and the 14 children who disappeared between 1862 and 1865 remains one of the darkest chapters in American history. Sister Agnes's secret records, which played a crucial role in uncovering the conspiracy, were preserved by the Diocese of Philadelphia and eventually deposited in the Pennsylvania State Archives. Researchers who examined these documents were struck by the care and detail with which Sister Agnes had recorded each child's name, age, and personal characteristics. Her notes revealed a woman who had genuinely cared for the children and was tormented by her inability to protect them from exploitation. The most haunting entry in Sister Agnes's records was beside Timothy Walsh's name, red hair, freckles, scar on left hand from kitchen accident, dreams of being a schoolteacher, afraid of thunderstorms, last seen June 15, 1862. God forgive us all. Similar personal details appeared next to every child's name, creating a tragic portrait of individual human beings who had been reduced to mere commodities in Father Brennan's trafficking network. The physical building that had housed Sacred Heart stood empty for nearly a decade after the scandal broke. Local residents reported seeing lights in the windows and hearing the sounds of children's voices coming from the empty rooms. Whether these phenomena were supernatural or simply the products of collective trauma and guilty consciences, they served as a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred there. In 1874, the building was finally demolished by its new owners, who claimed it was unsafe. But everyone in the area knew the real reason the building had become a monument to shame, too painful for anyone to look at. The bricks were hauled away and used to build a new courthouse in Lancaster, where they now serve as the foundation for the administration of justice. The land where Sacred Heart stood was eventually turned into a public cemetery, and in 1925, a modest granite marker was placed there to honor the lost children. The inscription reads, "In memory of the innocent children who suffered here, may they find in death the peace that was denied them in life." However, even this memorial sparked controversy, with some locals arguing that it would only serve to remind people of a tragedy better forgotten. Father Brennan served 18 years of his 20-year sentence before dying in federal prison in 1881. His death certificate listed pneumonia as the cause, but prison records suggested his declining health was due to melancholia, possibly reflecting some belated recognition of the enormity of his crimes. He was buried in an unmarked grave, and his name was deliberately omitted from any memorial records. The other priests involved in the trafficking network faced varying punishments, but were all defrocked by the Catholic Church. Attempts were made to locate the families who had purchased children from the network, but many had moved west, where federal jurisdiction was limited. The children sold to these families simply disappeared into the vast expanse of America's expanding frontier, their fates unknown. The Sacred Heart scandal led to significant reforms in how religious institutions were regulated in the U.S. New laws required regular government inspections of orphanages and other child care facilities. Strict documentation was mandated for any placement arrangements, and these reforms helped prevent similar trafficking operations. However, they also led to increased suspicion and regulation of religious charities that had previously operated with complete autonomy. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Sacred Heart tragedy was the recognition that institutional authority, whether religious or secular, could not be blindly trusted when it came to protecting vulnerable children. The case showed that even respected religious figures could commit monstrous crimes when personal ambition, institutional power, and social prejudice combined. The 14 children who vanished from Sacred Heart Orphanage were victims of a perfect storm of circumstances, wartime desperation, religious prejudice, economic opportunity, and moral corruption. Their individual stories were lost in the larger narrative of American expansion and conflict, but their collective tragedy serves as a haunting reminder of the price innocent people pay when society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. This mystery shows us that even our most trusted institutions can harbor the darkest secrets, and that the most innocent among us can fall victim to those who would exploit their vulnerability for profit. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or do you think there are still secrets buried in Pennsylvania's rolling hills? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts on whether some of those children might have survived and lived unknown lives under different names. If you enjoyed this dark chapter of American history and want more stories about the secrets hidden in our nation's past, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that make you question everything you thought you knew about the past. The truth is always more complex and terrible than we imagine, and there are countless other stories waiting to be told. See you in the next video, where we'll uncover another mystery that powerful people hoped would stay buried forever. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel to watch the next interesting videos.